36 weeks into the Friday Lives, and I'm still not sure if I ever really intended it to do this. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Add a little humanizing to the YouTube channel and rounding out the otherwise fairly directed internet activity that I do. Of course, now I'm trapped, right? God help me, should I miss a Friday Live? Well, hopefully people would be forgiving. Anyway, though, 36 and counting, haven't missed. What is happening? First of all, I was hoping to show you a sunnier room because we are into the very last days of any sun to speak of here in Sweden. And it was nice and glowy just a little while ago. And I got around to this and it's not. So that's about as much sun as we're getting. We're actually moving into the very late fall and early winter. And that means that dark is the new normal. We're still in, fair amount of sunlight there per day, but it shrinks. It visibly diminishes every single day. You could say, all right, it was sunny at this time yesterday, and today it isn't, and the next will happen. And that is, an exponential curve in its way, and so do whatever very small exponent we're talking about, but it definitely whips up. And so by a month from now, we will be in the deep and dark thick of the midnight sun. I have that backwards, right? Anyway, you know what I mean. It'll be dark almost all day. I wonder what the term, we say midnight sun, for, the summer, but what do you say for the winter? Well, okay. Trivialities aside, a little ecology, perhaps the nature of the planet, all very trivial. Well, anyway, the other details that come to mind are fairly minor. I have encountered, and without causing any landmine explosions, but I encountered a cultural thing that you only really encounter, a couple years in. Now I can understand the radio people when they chatter away, at least better than I could, and enough to pay attention to who's singing what songs. And among the unutterable and constant froth of the pop radio here, this song came up, and it didn't have a really scintillating name or theme. You'll feel all day, I want to have you. And it was not a really notable song, but it wasn't all frothy dance pop. It had a different sound, and the guy singing had a vocal approach that I had not encountered before in Swedish music. It was kind of, I don't know, brutish perhaps is a term, or a kind of a, the rough longshoreman poet, growling away sort of sound. And I was like, that's a different sound. And I went and I looked at the name. And so later on, I remembered this and said to my wife, hey, who's Ulf Lundell? That's, and I started to say descriptive terms, and the fact that the song really wasn't all that. Ooh, I got stopped. Don't say that. Don't say that. Don't. Okay. I learned, Wikipedia, clickety click. Okay. Ulf Lundell. Got it. Things not to say, in any kind of, even if it's not even particularly critical, but no, you learn just to get the reaction. You say, okay, so that's how we deal with that particular topic. So that was sort of just another one of those minor moments. Anything interesting happening? Well, there seems to have been a spike in one of my older YouTube videos. It was for one of the seminar topics in my site, Adept Play, about the role-playing hobby or activity. And it is an discourse or a set of suggestions, thoughts, argumentation regarding D&D as a cultural phenomenon which has religious qualities. Now, this is tricky because back in the 80s, the idea of Dungeons and Dragons as evidence of participating in demonic cult activity was actually kind of a big deal, and it had a wider impact than its literal interpretation would suggest. Yes, if you were a family who was concerned about literal demons, in your kids' heads or cultists coming to get them, that's one thing. But the wider impact of just kind of the seed of suspicion of, what could be harming our kids, penetrated way, way culturally further out than just that particular outlook. And the recoil within the rather small and just, I would have to say, really, really risk averse. And also, this is on top of a wave of the prior decade where role-playing had been touted, however idealistically, as the new thing, the new medium, the new hobby that's taking the nation by storm. And it just ran kind of face first into this, and the response of the hobby game store owners and so on is fairly predictable. Very small group of people tends to have a real straightforward approach toward distribution and promotion. Basically, if it sounds like it bugs somebody, don't do it, just drop it. So D&D itself got profoundly rewritten over the next few years, when all the boobies and the demons and everything kind of disappeared, and role-playing itself became extraordinarily, G-rated. Every game, the big game conventions had really strict standards about what could be in any game. All the distributors, all of the game store owners were just incredibly, incredibly aversive. And so for quite a while, to be edgy in role-playing, all you had to do was kind of nod at PG-13, and you were way over. You were, you're getting adult, you're getting this, you're getting that. And to go any further than that, that's bonkers. It took certain other publishers, and not limited to myself, but including myself, to shrug and say, look, if it can be in a book, it can be in a role-playing game. Done. But the point back then, in thinking about it, is that everybody also became in role-playing, became an ardent supporter of the idea that, well, it's just a game, it's just an activity, it's just to this, it's just to that, as a form of defense, to trivialize, as opposed to puffing it up like it was before about this thing taking the world by storm. And then it became, oh, it's nothing, it's nothing, it's nothing. Well, I do think it was something. And difficult as it may be and triggering as it may be to hobbyists for me to even use the term religion in this regard, I think we're looking at a genuine folk religion, which is a really interesting topic. I've got a whole series of videos about it. I bring it up because the first one of that series just spiked to hell and back in my YouTube analytics. Somebody somewhere found it. And somebody somewhere is talking about it, almost certainly having a beef. I'm not very hopeful otherwise. And so I'm kind of curious. I mean, it's not anything to do with anything I do online. I don't see a big spike. There's not a huge discussion at Discord, and there's been no comments at YouTube. So people are watching them, but for some reason, and there's a lot of people, I mean, you see a little spike in the analytics, right? And I'm kind of like, somebody's checking this out. Last 48 hours. So I wonder who. I dislike traversing out into the internet and going and wading over there and seeing what they're saying. That's never been something I like to do. Here, it's more of a sort of a YouTube manager point of view. You got like, look at that spike. Wonder what's happening. And given the nature of the subject matter, yeah, I'm a little curious, trepidatious, ready to be, ready to recoil myself, but at least a little curious. If you're involved in that whatsoever or know what that is about, I hesitate to ask, but here I am asking. What the hell? Who's interested? Okay. Anything further? Well, yes, my son came back a couple of weeks ago from school saying that we're supposed to watch something, that our parents suggest that has music as part of the story, music as being, conveying part of the story, and we're supposed to write about that or talk about it in school. And I thought a little bit, and I was like, "Baha, let's grab the kids. They've got 13-year-old, 13-year-old, and 11-year-old. It's the right time. Let's go watch this thing called Jesus Christ Superstar." So we did, right? The 1973 movie. And you should know that I encountered this particular cultural item through the rock album that was released, which came out in 1970, and very famous. The lead of Deep Purple was the vocals for Jesus. What's kind of interesting is that it wasn't a theatrical release. It was just an album. And no, plot was provided as an insert or anything. No stage directions or anything, because it's not a theatrical production. It's just an album. Probably doesn't surprise you, and as I've learned since, I was a little kid then, but didn't know this, but shouldn't surprise you at all that the minute anybody heard it, that they instantly put it on stage. So bootleg productions of Jesus Christ Superstar just sprang up everywhere. And then it quickly became a Broadway production. And so I think that was released as an album too. I'm not sure. Well, then that led to, in 1973, the movie. The story behind the movie remains murky. I have always wanted to find some fairly well-documented explanation of how it was that it came to be filmed in Israel and Palestine, out there kind of in the boondocks, in ruins, and presented in really local terms, really interesting. I mean, there are native Bedouins, just there scattered around in the backgrounds and stuff. And there are, there's Hebrew and Arabic on the bus and stuff like that. For those of you who haven't seen the movie, it's a really remarkable artistic piece with, layers of literalism and non-literalism, kind of built into it. Oh, look, we're being interrupted. That's going to have to wait a moment. And so the point being that it's also, I am getting nailed. Welcome to Parenthood. One moment, everybody. I'll share this with you. Hey, I'll call you back quickly. Wait. Well, what I'm facing here is a parental call to arms. But the reason I'm really bringing this up is because in 1970, 73, in that era, there was a battle for Jesus. The battle for Jesus was, the front lines were actually where I lived, up and down the coast of California. There were two. One of them, which at the time probably was considered not to have a whole lot of traction, you might think of as kind of an America First Jesus. The notion, that this was a Christian nation and that we are dominating the world as part of the expression of the superiority of this outlook, and that any slippage in this, as people were perceiving in that era, was literally, blasphemous. And it, stated outright like that, you're kind of like, well, that can't possibly be, the major side of Jesus-y political positions. And it wasn't, because the other big Jesus at the time, which at the time I would have thought of, or in retrospect thought of as kind of the more accessible and approved one in many ways. And don't forget, by the mid 70s, I'm heavily influenced by Marvel Comics and their hippie Jesus, who is Adam Warlock, as well as any number of parallel figures in pop culture, all of which are politically subversive, including the first Planet of the Apes movies and a number of others. Well, okay, I'm talking about the hippie Jesus. As I like to say, America had a choice in the early 70s, which is, does Jesus drop bombs or does Jesus drop acid? Does, Jesus run the whores out of town and make everybody moral? Everybody get upstanding and squeaky clean? Or does Jesus hang out with the whores and put his feet up on the couch? So the interesting side of this, but probably goes back in some ways. There was the book in the mid-60s, The Passover Plot, which isn't particularly scholarly, but raised the idea that there is a sociological story going on. If you squint and like squish parts of the Gospels together to make any kind of story, then that's a story you can definitely see, that this is a clash of politics, a clash of, social emotions, a clash of stuff like that, and that you will be screwed, basically, unless you let somebody tell you to do what to do. And so this particular notion started getting stated or expressed in a lot of ways. I think the Unitarians picked it up hard, at least along the left coast. I don't know about other parts of the country really, but their relationship to draft resistance and a few other things, that particular image, the long hairs, which most people don't really understand, are not what they're depicted as the movies would show us. I grew up among many long hairs, and most of them were Vietnam vets. So anyway, you have a very interesting set of notions of what is Jesus as a political cultural force in our country today, as is no doubt the hippie Jesus was killed. That's gone. It's out of the picture. I'm not talking about the stoner Jesus, the comedy Jesus that comes later. I'm talking about this other image that is perhaps culturally just gone. You can't reference it. You can't invoke it, certainly. And the bomb dropping Jesus took over in a wave that is almost beyond belief. At the time, it was a shock. I mean, Reagan was a joke candidate as far as the people I knew were concerned. And then it just became, mind shattering that anything like the moral majority or anything like Anita Bryant or any of these things could even have any traction outside of their own little dedicated group. I mean, clearly the people in question were living in a bubble. They don't, the collective that I was more familiar with were completely unprepared for the realities of the situation. If all of that seems a little bit, oh, that's topical today, isn't it? Yeah, it is actually. So yeah, there you go. I was interested. We watched the movie, talked about it, had fun talking about it, and it again struck me, just what a closed off road that image of the, if you will, the franchise, the IP, that's not the right terms, of course, but the Jesus-y aspect of life in the modern world, and how people were perceiving that it would make most sense, and how that particular view just came to an abrupt end. Well, that's the thoughts. Have a good day. Hope all is well for you